Welcome to the Equals Assessment webinar, Part 4. This is the final part of the Equals Assessment webinar. In this portion of the webinar, we want to share with you some time-saving tips that will make administering and preparing to administer assessments much more efficient for you. We'll share with you some ideas around the assembly of assessment kits and point you to some additional Equals resources. So I want to draw your attention back to the handout you received entitled How to Begin with Equals. In the bottom portion of the assessment piece, you will find some tips that I'm going to share with you now. I want you to know that you can refer back to this handout when the webinar is over. A reminder that the instructions and explanation around scoring, the basal, the ceiling, the suggested placement chart, items such as those are all located in your Equals Overview Guide on page 55. One teacher had this suggestion: test one subtest at a time. Give that subtest to all the students in your group. Then put it away and take out the next subtest. That way you only need to grab one set of testing materials and the students get a break during the assessment. Just a note about how many subtests to administer to a student. Obviously you know your students best, but we highly recommend that you don't attempt to administer several subtests in one sitting with any student. Ideally, you want to assess during the time of day when your students are at their best, feeling well rested, alert, and comfortable. Now, we talked about wanting to get started teaching right away, even if the assessment hasn't been completed. And so, again, I want to remind you that you could begin at your best guess, get your students started in the Equals program. You could begin teaching, and when you get to the follow-up page of each lesson, if you have a volunteer or a paraprofessional in your class, the paraprofessional could give the follow-up activities while you begin to pull students to administer the assessment. That way you can begin your Equals program and then gradually work through the assessments as you can. If you have other teachers in your school who are using the Equals math program, think about sharing the preparation of assessment kits. So if we divide up the assessment kits and then store them in a common area, we could check those kits out as needed. That way you are only preparing a portion of the assessment kits. To help you organize the materials for assessment kits, we have provided written directions for each of the subtest kits that can be shared by teachers. You have a handout that contains these instructions. One is entitled Equals Assessment Kit. Here you will find instructions for what you need to gather and print for each of the subtest kits. You will need jumbo zipper bags or other containers to store these materials in. So you'll notice that there are items you will need to print from the Equals CD as well as from the members only site. The other side contains materials that you will gather from your classroom. So items that don't come with the Equals kit, but rather some regular materials such as markers, containers, books, things like that, tape. So you'll gather all of these materials and you'll store them in jumbo zip bags, one for each subtest. Then we've given you some labels of items that you will pull from the Equals manipulative kit just before you administer the subtest. You can cut these labels out and attach them to the front of each assessment kit. This is not a list of materials that you'll find in the assessment kit, but rather a list of materials that you'll grab from the manipulatives kit just before you administer the assessment. When you have finished administering that subtest, you'll return these items to the manipulatives kit because you will need these items in your day-to-day teaching. Let's take a look at an example of an assessment kit. Here's the jumbo zipper bag with the label Geometry. Here are the items that were printed from the Equals CD and the members only site, some classroom materials that are needed, and then the list of items that you will pull from the manipulatives kit just before you administer the assessment. You notice you have items that you will need for the typical items on the assessment, and then also adapted materials. So we've made a list of both those, so you have the option to administer both typical and adapted items in each subtest. Here are some things that teachers from your district said about preparing assessment kits. One teacher had an idea to put picture cards and all other cards needed into card and photo sleeves, and then she organized each into the different concepts. During testing, it was easy for her to flip from one page to the other, and it made for easy storage. Another said this: organizing the supplies required beforehand makes implementation of the assessment quick, as all the materials are already gathered. All that is necessary is to get the materials listed on the front of the Ziploc baggie. I mentioned in a previous webinar that there are a couple of items that you will need when you are administering the assessment that are located on the members only site. So if you go to the members only site, under the Assessments tab, you will need two items: the Equals Assessment Answer Key and the Equals Assessment Scoring Sheet. I pointed out the scoring sheet during the webinar that dealt with scoring, but I just want to show it to you again. So here is the assessment scoring sheet that you will need, one for each student, and this is where you will record the student's raw score, their number of adaptations, and then do the calculations to come up with their adjusted raw score. This can be used as a baseline from the beginning of the year, and then you can do the assessment again. It can, as you know, it can also be used to help place your students in the Equals program. So you will take that score, go to the Equals starting point, the suggested starting point guide in your Equals overview, and place your student accordingly. The second handout that you will need from the members only site is the answer key. This is important. So for each subtest, all the items are listed here, and the correct answer is listed so that as you administer the subtest, you know exactly what your student should be doing. Both of these items are found in the members only site. And finally, there are a few other items that you might want to refer to from the Equals kit. A reminder that there is a pacing guide, and we'll talk a little bit more about the pacing guide when we talk about lessons in Equals. There is a glossary of terms. I mentioned assessment instructions, some calendar activities, and your math action dictionary, which will be important when you are trying to determine other ways for your students to show what they know. So that concludes our Equals Assessment webinar series.